a 4 of hearts. Terrible card for Bryn. If Chewie did have some sort of straight or flush draw, it has now missed, and Chewie's the type of player to take a shot when he's missed a draw, so it's going to be very difficult for Bryn to get away from this hand. It's just going to be a tough spot. He knows he doesn't really beat anything, any value hands. He only beats bluffs.
Yeah, the bet is $930,000 on the end. You can't blame Bryn Kenny for being just the slightest bit uncomfortable here.
It's time for a giveaway at WPT Global. Free $50 added to your account to the first 100 people who sign up. Simply follow these 3 steps. Go to WPTglobal.com/YT, make a new account with bonus code YT73, and deposit at least $1. That's it. $50 will be added to your account, but act fast. Only to the first 100 people.
Just 24 years old, but his presence vibes much more veteran than that.
Yeah, he's been playing poker for a long time. He's played a lot of hands thanks to the internet.
Queen Jack for Dan. He makes it 4,600 to go, and it's over to Jason Mercier.
Interesting spot here for Jason. They're 5-handed, so even though Dan's raised technically in early position or under the gun, it's just 5-handed. And Jason's in the small blind, a notoriously tricky position to play. Honestly, with this hand, I could see Jason doing any of his options, folding, calling, or 3-betting.
Now he opts for the fold.
It's tough to really argue with whatever decision Jason ends up coming up with. He's a very thoughtful, very deliberate player, so him deciding to fold there should be instructive for players.
9-7 offsuit for Schindler. He'll defend.
And you see really the difference between the big blind and the small blind. Obviously, Jason's hand with ace-9 suited is so much stronger than Jake's hand with 9-7 off. But Jason ultimately decides to fold, and Jake really with an easy defend from the big blind, getting a better price, capping the action. These are very important differences between the two positions.
Flop comes Jack-9 tray, 9s for Jake, Jacks for Dan. Both players have checked, and now the turn puts a 7 out there, giving Schindler the best hand with 9s and 7s.
And so Dan playing a little bit tricky by checking back the top pair, good kicker. I think part of the reason for that is this type of board, when players check back, tend to be boards that players are giving up on a lot.
Jake bets 7,500.
So Jake obviously going for value after turning 2 pair, and Dan not going anywhere with the top pair.
Indeed, he makes the call. Pot swells to 26,700, and here comes the river. Oh, it's a queen, and now Coleman has the best hand once more.
Colman had the best hand on the flop. It switched to Jake on the turn, and now back to Dan on the river. And remember, both players now have 2 pairs, so both players are confident that their hand is best. The real question will be, what does Dan do when faced with a river bet from Jake? We saw earlier that when Dan had river to flush, he just called a bet from Noah. So Dan is a little bit hesitant to try to go for thin value on against river bets.
15,100 is the bet that Dan is faced with.
It's a good-sized bet from Jake, but not huge. I wouldn't be surprised if Jake had a straight or, some sort of potentially better hand than Queen Jack if he would bet bigger.
So the bet sizing perhaps tipping Dan off. And Colman calls the 15,100, and he will take the pot with queens and jacks. And look at this, pocket aces for Matt Glantz. We know he's tight, but he's not so tight that he won't play that hand.
Yeah, maybe his patience is going to be rewarded here as he picks up pocket aces, and Ike picks up a hand of his own, ace-10 offsuit. Now, I think normally Ike would at least consider 3-betting, but against a tighter player in Matt Glantz, looks like he decides to just call from the small blind. An awkward, always tough position, the small blind, to know how to play these marginal hands here.
Jeff Gross with 9-6 offsuit. He's been pretty quiet as of late, probably dying to play a pot. And from an odds perspective, what a great opportunity to get in there.
Yeah, 9-6 offsuit, just a little bit too weak.
So it's heads up between Haxton and Glantz, and look at this. It's top set for Glantz, top and bottom for Haxton. This spells trouble.
Yeah, the case ace with a second pair for Ike. This is an absolute disaster. If a king, jack, or queen does not come off, Ike is destined to lose a huge pot here.
Isaac checks it over to Glantz, and Glantz bets 15,000.
Now, having played with Ike a bunch online, I know Ike plays a little bit of a more passive game, especially out of position. He likes to check and call, and he likes to do it with some strong hands as well as some weak hands to keep his hand disguised. And he does elect to just check and call on the flop here.
Blank on the turn.
Yeah,
Ike checks again.
Great card for Matt, and really not a bad card for Ike either. I can't imagine Ike really considering a fold on the turn or on the river unless, like I said, King, Jack, or Queen peel off on the river.
Well, the bet is 39,000 now.
It's actually a decent-sized bet here from Matt Glantz, looking to build a big pot, obviously, with such a huge hand.
And Haxton nonchalantly deposits his call into the middle.
Yeah,
He's drawing dead here.
Completely drawing dead, so any money that he adds to this pot is gone. And this 5 doesn't really change much again. I think it's going to be very tough for Ike to get away here. I actually think it might even be a mistake for him to fold. We can see that Matt Glantz has an absolute monster and that Ike had no shot the entire hand, but still, Ike with aces and tens here, probably just too strong to fold.
And he does check call that final bet, which was 65,000, and gets a look at top set. He doesn't seem entertained. Big pot heading over to 14. Couple of folds in front of Matt Glantz, who from the cutoff, or one away from the button, has raised it to 21,000. Blind steady at 5 and 10 with a 1K ante. And Isaac Haxton with ace-10 offsuit has called. Small blind folds, and now it's to Steven Silverman with Jack-8 suited. Tempting.
Yeah, I think Steven's almost always going to call here from the big blind. I was a little bit surprised to see Ike just call with ace-10 offsuit. Both him and Matt are relatively deep. I think I would have considered 3-betting there with ace-10.
From the big blind, 3 players to the flop.
As it stands, 3 players will be taking this flop, and it's ace, jack 5 with a couple of clubs. Everyone's got a piece. Silverman with middle pair, Glantz with middle pair, and a better kicker and a flush draw. Meanwhile, best hand belongs to Isaac Haxton with ace-10. But as you can see by the percentages, Glantz actually a favorite to win the pot right now. He bets 31,000. Haxton calls, Silverman out of the way, and we're down to heads up.
Yeah, pretty standard so far. It'll be interesting to see how Matt decides to play the turn here.
Queen rolls off, and Glantz checks to Isaac. Haxton checks back.
Isaac checks.
Matt's conservative and tight image definitely giving him a free card there on the turn.
Meaning Haxton more often than not would have fired that turn card against
I think
other
against some
opponents.
other opponents he would have.
And look at this.
Jack. Behind.
Gets checked all the way down, and Haxton content to roll over his ace-10 and give us a look at what's on his mind.
Juicy flop.
100, antes have doubled to 200, and you'll notice the magician has taken a seat at the table.
I'm gonna be very nitty now.
He has 100,000. That's what you get when you re-enter. Meanwhile, Richard Young is having a good time with King Jack offsuit. He opens for a raise to 3,000, and Tony G looks down at Ace Jack of hearts. He's just gonna call, no need to isolate.
Yeah, I mean, I think Tony could consider 3-betting with ace-jack of hearts, but I think the more standard play would be just call and see a flop.
Max Altergott gets involved with ace-5 offsuit.
Getting a pretty good price from the big blind with 2 people already in.
We take the flop 3-way, and it's 10-5 queen, all diamonds. Max has the nut flush draw and bottom pair. Richard has an open-ended straight draw, and Tony with the Broadway draw. Turn card, the 9 of hearts, and Richard has made the nut straight.
Now, from Max's point of view, after both Richard and Tony check the flop, it's not unreasonable to try to bet here, even not necessarily for value with just a pair of 5s, but he also has the ace of diamonds and is just taking control of the pot.
Well, Richard chose to smooth call with the nut straight, considering 3 diamonds are out there. It's not the nuts. Tony G's out of the way. We're down to heads up, and look at the river. A third 5 from Max. He may not have thought 5s were good once Richard called, but now he's got to believe his hand is good.
Yeah, this is the perfect card for Richard Young because now Max is definitely going to bet for value, and he does make a big bet here.
16,800.
So big that I don't think Richard can even raise here. With 3 diamonds and a paired board, looks like Richard just calls with the straight, and Max a little bit disappointed to have value bet the worst hand.
Yeah, he was ready to show his hand, and then he wasn't.
It's time for a giveaway at WPT Global. Free $50 added to your account to the first 100 people who sign up. Simply follow these 3 steps. Go to WPTglobal.com/YT, make a new account with bonus code YT73, and deposit at least $1. That's it. $50 will be added to your account, but act fast, only to the first 100 people.
For $4.5 million now, courtesy of that pot. He is the chip leader. As we get a look at Brandon Steven, Brandon owns 3 ECHL hockey teams, also the president of Brandon Steven Motors out in Wichita, Kansas.
Brian Rast raising it up with 7-5 suited. I do not like this play very much. I think it's just too weak of a hand, especially since Brian's not the chip leader anymore, and this player, Lucky Chewie, picking up 2 kings, he's the one that has the chip lead.
Yeah, and he's elected to just call.
Like we said before, Chewie plays a little bit of a different style. He definitely is capable and does 3-bet from time to time, but he's much more willing to just call with some of his big hands. It allows him to call with some weak hands, even though now we know that he has a monster.
Yeah, and Bryn Kenny doesn't know that he has a monster, but he does know that this is the exact sort of situation that is so tempting for a couple of jacks to make a squeeze play.
Yeah. Squeeze play, we know means when there's an initial raiser and a caller, and you make an additional raise trying to squeeze both players out of the pot.
300,000 is the number from Bryn.
Now, Bryn with 2 jacks, he understands that Brian is raising a lot of hands, that Chewie could have a big hand when he flats, but is more likely to have a weak hand. So I like this play from Bryn. He's building the pot with his good hand, and we'll see how Chewie decides to play it.
Well, he got Rast out of the way, but now that Andrew has decided to call an extra 230,000, what sort of hands is Bryn putting him on?
So I think Chewie's likely to have some sort of pocket pair, or maybe some big suited cards, a hand like, you know, ace, queen of diamonds or something like that.
A hand that hasn't necessarily connected with this flop. 10-8 deuce, a couple of spades.
It's a very dangerous flop for Bryn. Obviously, he has an overpair, but so does his opponent, who has a bigger pair. So it'll be interesting to see how the turn and river affect the texture of the board, but this could be a very expensive situation for Bryn Kenny.
Well, so far, 265,000 additional chips have been invested by Bryn, and Chewie just calls.
Yep. Staying consistent, Chewie elects to play relatively passively. It's important to note that Chewie is also in position, which makes it easier to play passively because you're given the opportunity to make the final bet in the hand.
Turn card is a 5 of clubs, and now Bryn takes his foot off the gas.
Yeah, so it's a very difficult spot for Bryn. He's playing against the chip leader, a player who's in a natural position to put a lot of pressure on him. He does have an overpair, but this pot is huge, almost 1.3 million chips in there. So I like this check from Bryn. I can't imagine him folding on this turn card, but once he calls, depending on what the river will be, that will be where this hand really gets interesting.
Chewie, after having it checked to him, bets 390,000. What do you think of the bet size?
You know, in 3-bet pots, bet sizes tend to be a little bit smaller. These guys are pretty deep, so, you know, Chewie just trying to build a pot, trying to keep Bryn in there. I like this bet. It's not too small, but it's also not so large that it scares Bryn away.
Mission accomplished as Bryn slides 390K of his stack into the middle of this pot, up over 2 million, Olivier, and the river, a 4 of hearts.
Terrible card for Bryn. If Chewie did have some sort of straight or flush draw, it has now missed, and Chewie's the type of player to take a shot when he's missed a draw, so it's going to be very difficult for Bryn to get away from this hand. It's just going to be a tough spot. He knows he doesn't really beat anything, any value hands. He only beats bluffs.
Yeah, the bet is 930,000 on the end. You can't blame Bryn Kenny for being just the slightest bit uncomfortable here.
Call.
And he says call. That'll cost him almost $1 million more as he gets a look at 2 kings. And over to the chip leader goes a massive pot.
Very, very nicely played hand from Chewie, maximizing his profit, winning an absolutely massive pot with just 1 pair. Obviously a favorable situation since his opponent had an overpair and all the draws missed, but still a very well played hand from Chewie.
And some of the finer details that separate the top pros from just the average pros. Your ability to not only get
the level of poker, these players are confident in themselves, confident in their styles and their approaches, and it's really going to just come down to the situations they're in and the hands they're dealt.
Ace-7 suited for Jason Les, and he just mucks it.
That being said, You know, maybe he was a little bit susceptible to the psychological dynamic you just described and decided to just, he got a borderline hand and decided to play it conservatively and just fold, not take a chance, maybe take a breather.
Brian Rast's hand, far from borderline. He makes it 115,000 to go with King Queen. But the real queen belongs to Andrew Lichtenberger, Ace Queen. He's in the small blind and makes the call for 90,000. He'll be heads up out of position.
I think a lot of players would have 3-bet Ace Queen here, especially against a player as aggressive as Rast.
Oh, and that's a troublesome flop, Olivier.
Wow, this is a great situation for Chewie, but again, if he had 3-bet, he might have gotten a call from Brian, and this would be even better.
Instead, he's checked it over to Brian. Both players with queens. Andrew has Brian in horrible shape as Rast bets 140,000. And Chewie just calls. It's almost like he's content to let his opponents handle the betting for him a lot of times.
Yeah, I mean, this also, it has to be said, is the way that the majority of pros have evolved their games, especially out of position when your opponents have taken the lead in heads-up pots, to check and call, play your hands passively. It allows you to play your weak hands and your strong hands similarly. It allows you to disguise the strength of your hands.
Well, another check from Chewie and another bet from Rast. 325,000 this time as this pot is quickly bloating. Chewie makes the call. We're up to 1.235 million in the middle. The river card, a deuce of diamonds.
Now, this does complete a backdoor flush, but besides that, Brian should be pretty comfortable that he has the best hand. Brian does have a lot of live experience, though, and he might be picking up that Chewie is relatively strong.
Chewie checks. And Brian checks behind him, Olivier.
Impressive check. I think Brian might have picked something up there. He has great instincts at the table. Maybe picked something up from Chewie and decided to just check back and see what Chewie had. Chewie, of course, with the ace-queen.
Yeah, Andrew's been taking a lot of lines similar to that one in other hands and pots. And, of course, at all times, pros are thinking about that when involved in pots with their opponents. And let's send it back to the feature table. Fold it around to less.
That's a very interesting fold from Jason Less.
Yeah,
I mean,
pocket threes right into the muck.
Now, Jason might be playing a more than a normal conservative style just because Brian is on his left, and Brian's a very aggressive player, but I'm not sure I fully agree with folding a pocket pair there.
Brian has made it 115,000 to go on the button with his ace. And now over to Chewie, who's got 3-5 offsuit, but will defend.
Yeah, Chewie has an enormous amount of experience playing heads up. He's got the most chips at the table, and since he already just calls with most of his strong hands, he's probably going to be able to feel comfortable playing his weaker hands the same way.
Look at this flop, Olivier. Ace, 5-3, both players with 2 pair. Rast's aces and 5s better than Chewie's 5s and 3s.
And depending on how the board runs out, this is almost always just going to go check, bet, call, check, bet, call, check, bet, call. And Chewie should lose 3 solid bets here. Really unlucky cooler for Chewie here.
Yeah, so far it's 110K for Chewie, who checked, let Brian bet, and call, just like you said, Olivier. And again, he's checked the turn after the jack shows up.
And we've seen throughout this tournament, that is the style that Chewie likes to play. And to be honest, it's a style that many pros are utilizing.
A little over a half pot size bet from Rast, 270,000.
And there's just nothing Chewie can do except for check call in this turn. The only way he can get away is if the river is a jack, maybe a 5.
And Chewie makes the call for 270. And here comes the river. Oh, it's a 5. Chewie has hit a full house, 5s full of 3s, but Rast has him crushed with 5s full of aces.
So obviously this is the worst possible card for Chewie. I mean, now he's trapping. Now he's probably going to check raise here. And, I mean, they might get all in. I mean, this is an incredible card.
Rast bets 640,000.
Big bet here from Rast. But again, Chewie's loving it. I mean, Chewie just made a full house.
Burger with ace 10 is going to raise. Oh, no, wait a minute. He's just called.
Interesting play by Chewie here. I think the main reason he does this is because he thinks his hand is just a little awkward to play in a 3-bet pot, so he wants to limp, and if somebody has a good hand like Noah does, he can afford to just call and see a flop.
Well, Noah with the 2 jacks has 2-bet to 320,000. Both blinds have been dismissed. Now it's back over to Chewie. Any chance he's going to limp 3-bet?
No, that's just not Chewie's style, and it wouldn't make sense with this hand.
And he makes the call for 240,000, as predicted.
Chewie gonna have to get pretty lucky to beat Noah Schwartz's pocket jacks.
Yeah, here comes the flop. Oh, and luck has been exactly what Chewie has had plenty of at this final table. He hits trip aces, and that's even better than hitting just a single ace as far as getting action from Noah is concerned.
Absolutely, it makes it that much less likely that Chewie has an ace and that Noah will give him credit for one.
Never mind the fact that he limped in, making Noah feel that much more comfortable that Chewie doesn't have an ace, as we see Schwartz bet $355,000 and get called. Here comes the turn card. It's a 4.
So this is such a dry board. When Noah gets called here, he's got to at least start to think that Chewie could have an ace. I don't mind checking back here. I don't even mind checking on the flop. Noah deciding to bet again for value, hoping that Chewie has a pocket pair or maybe just a stubborn king high. And it's not particularly likely that Chewie was just floating out of position.
Well, if there was a chance that Schwartz was going to feel very comfortable as of the call of $525,000 by Lichtenberger, that chance has slimmed.
Yeah, pretty easy check back here for Noah Schwartz.
Yeah, both players knuckle the end.
Incredible.
Lichtenberger gives Schwartz a look at an ace, and Noah seems disgusted.
It's time for a giveaway at WPT Global. Free $50 added to your account to the first 100 people who sign up. Simply follow these 3 steps. Go to WPTglobal.com/YT, make a new account with bonus code YT73, and deposit at least $1. That's it. $50 will be added to your account, but act fast, only to the first 100 people.
They're both very cerebral, theoretical thinkers, so I don't think that'll have too much of an effect on their play. They might have some specific adjustments for one another, but overall, they're going to play the style that they think works best.
Heads-up action underway with Lichtenberger on the button, raising to $225,000 with Queen Jack. Marchese is going to 3-bet it to $750,000 with Ace Jack suited. The blinds are 50 and 100,000. The ante is 15K, and the decision is back on Chewie, who's going to call.
Everything relatively standard. Chewie's hand good enough for an open and a call in position.
Here comes the flop. It's got an ace and a queen in it, both players with a pair. Marchese's is best.
Pretty dangerous situation for Chewie. He's got to at least call 1 bet.
$1.5 million in the middle. And to continue, it'll cost Chewie $900,000.
Yeah, Chewie does have middle pair here and a backdoor straight draw. Not going to go anywhere to just 1 bet from Tom.
And Chewie slides $900K of his own into the middle. This pot quickly swelling, $3.3 million and change. Here comes the turn card. It's another ace, and that's a troublesome one for Chewie.
Yeah, another ace makes it a little bit less likely that Tom himself has an ace. It also brings a second flush draw. So there are a number of draws that Tom could have. He could have a straight draw, a diamond draw, or a heart draw.
That would cause him to potentially fire another barrel. This one, 1.9 million caliber.
And this is the real question for Chewie. Is he going to call this bet? I think if Tom jams the river after this bet, it'll be pretty tough for Chewie to continue, but Tom, with 3 aces here, comfortably betting for value.
Well, Chewie is going to call the 1.9 million, and he certainly needs to be thinking about what he's going to do if Tom jams the end. But with this sort of texture, the river card will matter.
The river card definitely matters.
8 of clubs.
Oh.
Wow, Tom instantly goes all in here. Very comfortable with this river card.
None of the draws got there, Olivier.
Right, so this is what Chewie's thinking. I mean, if Tom had a draw, a hand like King 10, Jack 10, 9-7 of diamonds, you know, something like that, all of those draws have missed. The 8 of clubs is pretty much a complete blank card. So Chewie beats all those hands. At the same time, though, you know, Chewie himself could easily have an ace. So it's not that likely that Tom is bluffing. Tom's played his hand completely consistently. It makes perfect sense that he would have a big hand. This is a tough situation for Chewie, but at the end of the day, you know, this is why Chewie plays his strong hands this way. It's because he can call with those hands and then fold his medium strength hands like he just did.
Yeah, he lays it down. And